How come my partner and I get on the same page about money? Is one of the most common questions we get, and we're here today to answer it.
This is Queer Money episode number 566, and today Adam Cole, the couples money coach, joins us to discuss couples financial planning. So now, on with the show. With no fees or minimums and no overdraft fees, banking with Capital One is the easiest decision in the history of decisions. That's banking reimagined. What's in your wallet? Terms apply. See CapitalOne.com/bank for details. Capital One, N.A., member FDIC. So one of the most reoccurring questions that we get, other than I'm a gay man, where can I retire that's affordable and LGBT friendly, and I don't have anything saved for retirement, and I want to retire yesterday. The most other common question we get, so the second, is how do I get my partner on the same page with me about our finances? There seems to be a big aversion to the community to actually sit down with their spouse or partner and say, hey, let's talk about our money. So we decided to have a couples financial coach come on today to talk about how couples can talk about money. And as you've heard before, couples who talk about money have better sex. So that's, I don't know what else I need to tell you. That being said, Adam, what are effective strategies for, I think what people are concerned about is like, I'm going to like upset the other person, or this is going to end up in a fight. So what are ways to like foster open communication and build trust sort of around such a sensitive topic?
There are really a number of ways, but my personal favorite is to start by just having a conversation and not talking about numbers specifically, right? Because the thing about the numbers is there's a potential for arguing, and doubly so if you aren't clear on where you're at financially and you're just kind of doing almost kind of guesswork. But if you start with a conversation, and in particular, one about just how you think and feel about money, how your parents handled money, how that influenced you. These kinds of questions, they're basic in a certain sense, but they really invite you and your partner to reflect and share with each other, which is great because I learn more about myself, which will help me be better and manage my emotions and conversations later. And I learn more about you, which means typically I'm going to also be able to have a better conversation with you. You know, I'll understand you that much more. And it doesn't have so much potential for arguing or fighting. And even though it sounds strange, like, okay, but you're still going to have to talk about the money at some point. Yes, but don't underestimate the impact that just having a couple of conversations about money that aren't really uncomfortable or don't end in fights, for some reason, that just seems to have a big impact on people's expectations, and it helps kind of calm the storm so that they can start having better conversations when they do actually have to make important and sometimes difficult decisions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I love the thought that you have here around not talking about numbers, because I think that to start out, a lot of people have numbers in their head that they use as judgment factors, right? Mm-hmm. I need to be, if I'm not making this amount of money, depending on where you live, if I'm not making this amount of money, people are going to think less of me. Or if I have this much debt, people are going to think less of me. And we start to build all this shame framework up around our money numbers. And so if somebody says, okay, what are your numbers? Your immediate response is probably to withdraw or to retract and say, run through all those numbers in your head and say, which ones am I comfortable sharing and which ones am I ashamed to share, right? And if we don't talk about the numbers, then we don't have to start doing that kind of calculation in our head of what can I and what don't I want to share.
Right. I mean, imagine it's like, if you're imagining going on a first date, it's okay for the conversation to start off a little bit lighter and you start to build some rapport. And maybe on a future date, or at least later on in the first one, you can start getting into some bigger, important life questions and what's your future look like and what are your deal breakers. But it's okay if the first time you meet up, it's like we're just talking about whatever and making jokes or telling, stories of when we did this or that when we were a kid. So similar kind of idea here. And I mean, ideally, we'd have the be able to lean on the rapport that you have with your significant other in general. But money just spooks people in a way that they need an extra boost a lot of the time to be able to have these conversations and trust that they're going to go okay. Uh, so that's as far as actively what I recommend. But the other piece is you talked about getting on the same page, and it's a popular phrase that people use. Sometimes I like to push my clients and say, well, where is the issue though? Because some people being on the same page, they think it means they have to agree on 100% or 95%. And it doesn't necessarily mean that, right? Yes, there are deal breakers. I want to have kids. You don't want to have kids. That's a tough one. Okay. But like, I like to spend more of my money on going to nicer restaurants, and you prefer to spend more of your money on going to the spa. Like, that's not a problem, right? That's not being on the same page. That's just you're humans with different preferences. And once you can communicate about it and understand where you're at financially and your goals, then you can craft an approach that gives each of you as much of that good stuff as you can. So people, especially if it's like an uncomfortable topic or they feel anxiety, they'll default to like, well, we're just so different, or we don't have the same values, or I don't know if we have the same goals. And if you can like slow down and have some of these conversations foundationally first, a lot of times it's not as bad as you thought, and maybe a lot better than you thought.
Yeah, 100%. David and I often say that couples don't need to have all the same goals. They just need to be able to support each other in those goals and be open and honest and transparent about what those goals are, so that somebody doesn't feel like, oh, he or she is hiding something from me, and I had no idea that they were saving money in this account for XYZ result. But as long as you can support each other in what those goals are, which means you can be different people with different interests, and both get
Absolutely.
value from being on the same page technically with your finances. So I'm sold on the idea of bringing the conversation up with my partner, and I'm not as scared about it. How do I share financial goals, and then how do we align our priorities so that we can be working together, even if those priorities are a little bit different?
Sure. I mean, doing this the ideal way, it is a bit of a process, right? I mean, you want to break the ice, you want to make sure you understand your financial situation, which I consider the four most important things to be your income, your expenses, any debts that you owe, and any assets you have, any items of value. Uh, with those four pieces of data, you can make really good progress. So that's going to be an important part of it. But in terms of getting aligned on your goals, oftentimes the first step is actually thinking about what your goals are. Sometimes we haven't actually even thought about that as individuals. And then the next step would be actually talking to each other about it. And then, like I was alluding to before, that even if you have some goals that are different, it's not necessarily an issue. So, really, what you'll want to do is look at that financial information and the goals you have, try and get a sense of what it's going to take to achieve them, how much money it would take, and then see what kind of plan you can put together to get there. Now, in terms of which goals you're going to prioritize, I mean, there's really a number of approaches, but what I advocate for usually with my clients is something like uh, write out your top three individual and shared goals or joint goals. That's something that you would work with your partner on. and then just compare notes. And if you're fortunate to have some that overlap, those are gimmies, right? And then maybe you pick one from each of you that isn't shared. Uh, this is nothing that I've talked to a client before. It's nothing that's in my book, but my wife and I were trying to decide what to do with our new that project because we just got a new house earlier this year. And I wrote down all the items, the things that we wanted to do, and the cost. And then I had a column for each of us where we ranked it from 1 to 10, like 10 being this thing is like so we want it so badly, like it's going to make a huge difference or what have you. And the key to that process is always, if you're already writing down the price, do that 1 to 10 scale irrespective of the price. Don't worry about, oh, well, this costs a lot, so I'm going to rank it lower or something. No. Same when you're thinking about how you want to pay off your debts. Don't worry about the interest rate or the monthly payment in terms of trying to figure out how much you want to get that debt paid off and how heavily it kind of sits on your mind and your heart, right? Just think about that. And that's one data point alongside the other information, right? So we just literally each gave our rating to each item, and I kind of ballparked it and found a cutoff. It was like anything that was below like 14 points between the two of us, just hit those rows. And then we looked at like the 5 or 6 that were left, how much we wanted them, the cost, and we talked a bit about it. And, then on to the first one and just kind of keep on going. And, some of these things were smaller items that if we decided we wanted to do them, we could just go to the store and get the thing. But the process is going to be essentially the same, even if they're larger goals that take more time, just they take more time. And that's it. I guess a little more patience required for those.
The mission of Queer Money is to financially empower the LGBTQ plus community. Join us in thanking Capital One for supporting that mission. I appreciate what you're saying here is because it almost has it's a very team-like mentality, right? We know where we as a couple, where we want to get to, right? And you look at I'm thinking of sports references here, but when you look at the team, right, the team always has a goal to win. Whether you're on defense or offense, you always have a goal to win. And that when you create a list like this and you give your numbers to each other, you each assign your numbers to it, you're kind of creating this. Okay, this is what it takes for us to win, right? In this particular scenario, we need to do this to win. And then we know each other, what we each of us need to do to help carry that particular item over the finish line to win.
Right. And one of the nice things about the approach that I just shared is that you don't actually have to go through and narrow down any priorities, right? You don't have to jockey for whose ones make the list and whose ones don't. You just put all of them on there and you give them all the ratings, whatever you feel. And then you just talk based on that, based on how much you want them and what they're going to cost and how long that might take you to achieve it, et cetera. So, trying to think of carrying on the sports metaphor, but it's like the truth is it doesn't matter how you get more points than your opponent, whether it's because you outscored them, you had a high scoring offense. I'm University of Miami graduate, and that's our football team this year. Terrible defense, but the best quarterback in the country. It's exhausting to watch sometimes. Or if you have a tremendous defense who barely gives up any points and your offense just has to do just enough, right? So yeah, I'm here for the sports metaphors and here for the team metaphors. So I like it.
So for your house, it sounds you've got you're both trying to make your home nicer. So you're kind of working toward that goal of making a nicer home, and you might have different disagreements on exactly what makes the home nicer. How do you know if you have extraneous goals, like you said earlier, you want to fix up the house, you're both working on that goal, but one of you likes the spa and the other likes to go out to fancy restaurants for dinner. How do you then work towards that team goal and then also support each other on those separate goals?
Yeah. Well, in terms of supporting each other, I mean, certainly I think both people being clued in on a regular basis, at least once a month into where you're at financially, whether individually and also any joint stuff is really great. And so, of course, just being kind of cheerleaders for each other and, being excited and, the little things. It's like if you have kids or dogs or what have you that take a lot of time, and it's one of those things where, like, if you don't carve out time for something, it doesn't happen, then, work with your significant other and, like, say, we got to that goal, you're going to go, you can go get that spa day. When do you want to do it? I'm going to take care of whatever needs to be taken care of for that day. Right. So that's kind of that concrete way that doesn't actually cost anything. But in terms of deciding how to allocate them, the truth is it is a little bit mushy. It is a little bit gray. What I usually have my clients do is come up with an amount each month that goes towards whichever category or whichever goals, and try it out for 3 months and see how it goes for you. Right. The point is not to figure out a financial plan and it's the perfect one and you never look at it ever touch it ever again. Right. It's like, let's get the key information that we need to have, make a plan that we think works pretty darn well, and then let's keep up with it and check in on it and iterate as needed. And, if you're really stuck on how to do it, the simplest way is just start by allocating an equal amount to each person's like kind of categories where it's just things that they like to spend on, and the other person, it's not like it's one person's priority and not the other. You're just allocating an equal amount of money, $500 each person a month for whatever they like to spend on, for example. And then you can go from there and just see how it feels, see how it works, and change it up as needed.
So I feel like what I'm hearing from everything you've said so far for this interview in summary is just pretty much just talk with your partner about money. Like just be open and transparent and have a dialogue with them about this topic. Why is it so hard to talk about this then if it's just coming down to simple conversations?
Yeah. I mean, it's maybe trite to say that money is a taboo, but I think that's still the case. Even if we know about money, we don't necessarily know about the human side of it. And even if we know a bit about the human side of it, that doesn't mean we are comfortable or even have the skills to translate that to a situation where we have another person in the picture, a significant other, right? Let alone when there are other family members in the picture, whether it's pets, kids, even parents you might be supporting, right? Then it gets even more complicated and more different things are in play. So really at the core, whatever communication skills that you find that are working for you and your partner, try them with the financial conversations because they might actually work better than you think. The same ideas of listening to what each other has to say, asking questions, trying not to make assumptions, get clarity before you get too excited and all this kind of stuff. I mean, this is good when you're talking about money, just the same as when you're talking about anything else, especially anything else that's a challenging topic. But I also think that if it's tough for you and maybe the questions that I referenced, asking how is money growing up and all that, if it's not getting you there, another thing that you can sometimes try is to give each other a long hug and then talk about it. There are like studies that have been done on these different kind of hacks, like or looking in each other's eyes for a certain amount of time or kissing for a certain amount of time, that you're just basically, I sound like Silicon Valley guy when I say that probably, but
I feel like I'm
hacking
talking
your
to
like
Dr.
brain
Ruth.
chemistry. Oh, that part, okay. But you kind of hacking your brain chemistry, and if there's something that, I mean, shoot, it's free and it can flood you with the endorphins or whatever, right? And then that'll just help you relax and have these conversations. Money, not always, but in a lot of cases, the fear of how it will go ends up being worse than how it actually does go.
Right.
And I'm not
Right.
saying that's always the case, right? I do have clients who, even when they talk about it in earnest, it's still difficult, and that's normal. But, if you're avoiding it because you're scared, understandable, and also it may go better than you think.
A lot of you said a lot there, and there are a couple of things I wanted to call out. I love that you called pets members of the family, and how they money gets spent on them because in our household,
These
if
two ruled
if
the
was
school.
right, if it was up to John, 3/4 of our disposable income would be spent on our dogs.
And mine is the pickiest eater. I mean, I don't like you can't give him even like chicken or steak like a couple of days in a row. He gets tired. He don't eat it. He won't eat it. I'm like, oh, you're actually pickier than my son. My
Yeah.
toddler is less picky than the dog. But
The other thing I do appreciate is like that what you said, hacking the other systems that we have as human beings to help make this easier. It's really hard to have a charged conversation with your partner when you're holding their hand, right? When you're holding hands, like if you're sitting on the couch together or you're sitting in two chairs next to each other and you're holding hands, it's almost like it's almost impossible to get into an angry confrontation with someone when you're having that when you're being slightly intimate. Just the fact of holding hands really does help.
yeah,
You're you're treating your partner as more of the the non-platonic. I'm trying to think of your amorous partner, right? This is not a business partner. This is the person you love, right? And if you treat them like that,
yeah,
and you're having the kind of feelings about them during these kinds of conversations, and remembering this is somebody you love and they love you back. Well, at least I hope they love you back, right? Then it makes that can help make the whole conversation. This is not a business conversation. This is it's a loving conversation between two people.
yes, and it's because it can be a stressful topic. We can almost like assume that the other person is like doing it on purpose. It feels like they're doing it just to upset us. And the reality is usually not, right? And even if they are, that's usually a need that's not being met, a cry for some sort of help or support or something. And if you can identify that, it's like now instead of you berating me for that I like to, get Chipotle on Wednesday nights, now we're having a conversation about how your parents always stressed out about money and you had to always buy, the store brand cereal. And now you have a lot of anxiety when it comes to like, you're like, I have to have so much savings because you're worried that you're going to end up like your parents, right? What a different conversation we're having if we're able to do that. And so that's the goal. And I think you're absolutely right. Sitting next to the person holding their hand. Um, I like to have clients turn towards each other and look at each other. But if you're going to do that, the trick is you actually have to turn your chair because it's tempting to just kind of turn your upper body. But when you turn your upper body, it's like you're not really fully present with them and you can kind of easily pull back. But if you
Right.
turn your chairs and you're really like head on, it does make a difference. And shoot, by all means, even if that feels like a cheap trick, use them. Use
Yeah.
them, really. Like, it's okay, like whatever. Because this is your life, and how you navigate your finances has a huge impact on the quality of that life. So why not use everything you have at your disposal to try and make the best out of it? No
Well,
shame in
David's referred to me as a cheap trick, and it still seems to work.
Of course, you
that.
had to go there.
No comment.
So I'm curious. You touched on this. So much of personal finance is personal, right? It's coming with a lot of emotions, our money
Mhm.
story, our backgrounds, all that. What is your advice for couples who one has an aversion to talking about money. They bring a lot of baggage with them as it relates to money for whatever reason, and the other is more amicable with having the conversation, is open to talking about their finances, doesn't have any inhibitions. How do you manage both sets of emotions to get to a positive place?
I mean, delicately, really. And like when I say about starting by having a conversation and not going straight to the numbers, that doesn't have to be one conversation and now you're good. And like, it's okay if that takes time. The other thing is, sometimes this comes up in the context of like sharing finances and having some more, let's say, a joint account or everything shared. I've had clients who started smaller. I mean, I like to jokingly say, if you're worried about having a joint account, if that feels like too much right now, buy a toaster together. But I've had clients who actually like went and bought like a van for traveling and vacations together, right? And that for them was appropriate for where they were in their lives and relationships. And it felt like, one of those steps, it's like enough to make you uncomfortable so that you have to lean in and grow, but not so much that it's like you're really just causing unnecessary like stress and trauma for yourself. Like, so, you can find that balance. And one thing that sometimes helps if you're the partner, let's say, who is more inclined to talk about it, which in many cases means that you might also be one bringing a certain level of like anxiety that's kind of overt to it, right? These that you're having these conversations, it's going to serve you well, not just for handling your finances now, but for ongoingly. And those are positive steps, So a lot of times it's like, well, but we still have to deal with the numbers. And
Mhm.
I'm not here like I always say there's no magic pill, there's no overnight fix, right? But know that any and all of those things are progress. Looking at your bank statement or your credit card statement, especially if it's something you've been avoiding, is progress.
Mhm.
Filing the taxes that you've been waiting on filing is progress. Having a conversation about how your prior significant other treated you regarding money and how they used it in this way or that way, right? This is all progress. And, hopefully your situation is one that you can take it at an appropriate pace without creating too much extra damage and conflict. And then you just build. But it's like, this is wherever you are at, that's where you're starting from.
Mhm.
And then the goal is, right, of course, just to go up from there and let any of these conversations, any of this data collection, any of this analysis is up. So you just gotta just kind of keep doing it, right? And there's if you notice a tendency that one or both of you wants to slow down and pull back because you're scared, that's where you have to think about it and talk about it. And like, is this fear really like because this is not the right pace for me right now? Or is this fear I'm just nervous or scared? But the conversation that you want to have is appropriate. And let's figure out how we can push through that. And the answer is it's really going to be different.
Mhm.
I really am so hesitant for so many reasons to be like, this is the approach. And even if I say something that sounds like a rule of thumb, it's more like, this is like a framework, but you have to adapt it to how you see fit, because some people grew up talking about money with their family and it was really healthy. Some people, it was a huge subject of stress. Some people have experienced financial abuse in past relationships and they're not as ready to, let's say, join bank accounts with you, even though they're totally in love with you and want to spend their life with you, right? So you really, this is why the communication aspect is so important, including because it will sometimes help you realize that you take it to mean a certain thing if your partner doesn't want to have a joint account with you, but that may not be what it actually means or where it's coming from, right?
Yeah,
so
true.
the more background you have, the better decisions you can make.
Mm-hmm. So say I'm taking all this advice, we're having the conversations, we're managing everybody's emotions appropriately. But a unique twist for many of our listeners and viewers is that they're with a partner who's of a significantly different age. What strategies or tips do you have for folks who are in a partnership and one is considerably younger and the other is considerably older? How do you work towards mutual goals together or manage the household finances together to create that prosperity plan?
Right. Basically, similar to what I was saying before, where you don't necessarily have to have the exact same goals. And so you can brainstorm all of the goals that you might have individually or jointly, and also the timelines, which I didn't necessarily mention earlier. But that's an important piece too, right? Because where there's a big age gap, for example, maybe one person is a lot closer to retirement age and the other one is like not that close to retirement age. Okay, so then the goal is to make sure that the one who's closer to retirement is on track for a timely retirement, and that the other person who has maybe more time, you account for that. Now, is there an easy and obvious formula for like how much of our money left over at the end of the month goes to my 401k versus yours, given how much you have or haven't saved and given how close you are to retirement and how much you hate your job? I mean, there isn't a formula, right? But a lot of times what I'll tell people is the best you can do is get the information and the data you can, right? Like, for example, maybe you talk to your financial advisor and they give you a sense of, if you want to retire with this standard of living, you need to save this much a month. And if you want to live with that standard of living, you need to save that much each month. Okay, so you get all the data you can, and then you put together a draft of a plan and you say, okay, how do we feel about this version of it, right? If we did it this way. And then you can compare it to another iteration that's like, a lot of it the same, but some tweaks. And how does that one feel? And then, part of it is there is some almost guesswork. I almost hate to use that word, but it's like, we just simply put, we don't know what the future holds. And we're actually quite terrible at assessing what we're going to want in the future. Is just reading an article about this by a guy named Adam Grant. He said, if you think you know what the next 4 years are going to go like after the election, you're wrong. Basically, that we have no idea, that there's so many different pathways and it's impossible to know. And like, related to that, right, we think in our minds that if I don't have this, I'm not going to be happy. Or if I do have this, I am going to be happy. And setting aside that there's a whole universe of being happy regardless of what you have materially or what have you, even aside from that, you don't necessarily know what's going to matter to you 5, 10, 20, 30 years from now, right? Now, what does that mean? It doesn't mean that it's hopeless. It means be solid and just stay on top of it, and then do your best and trust yourselves and each other to adapt as you need to later, right? But it's like, is it better to be saving towards retirement and then you realize a couple of years out, oh, I'm a little short, or you don't save for retirement, and then you realize a couple of years out, ooh, I'm all of that short,
Right.
right? So do things that put you in like a good spot. I mean, on at the end of the day, fundamentals, building up an emergency fund, putting money towards your future, being mindful of debts that charge you a high interest rate and trying to pay those down, keeping your fixed expenses and your day-to-day expenses below what you're earning. These are the fundamentals. Those are going to serve you well, period. And then in terms of how aggressive to be of like spending the money now versus saving it and how much to each person when there's a difference in age, just give something reasonable a shot, and you can adjust over time. There's there are always other ideas and other opportunities, and there's no way to assure that you're going to get it perfect. So if you can maybe release yourself of that like expectation, um, that'll help. And relatedly, also, there's nothing you can do to eliminate all risk, right?
Hmm.
All risk that you're not going to have enough money for a certain thing that you want. It's just impossible. And so if you don't maybe put the pressure on yourself that you have to strive for that, then sometimes that opens up some other possibilities, some other opportunities.
Yeah.
Right. Makes a lot of sense.
I think that one of the things that I'm hearing here, and I think it's really important, is that you make sure you build in some flexibility to your finances in your relationship. Because sadly, we live in a world today where consumerism has trained so many of us through low monthly payments to spend every dime that we make every single month, and we have zero flexibility. And that's why I think that's one of the reasons why inflation hit so many people so hard in 2023, is because so many people had built in zero flexibility in their budgets, because all of the things, right? We wanted a new home. We saw how many people were going out and buying new homes because interest rates were low. We saw so many people going out and buying new cars because interest rates were so. We got trained on this idea that these interest rates are so low and they're going to stay this way. And so many of us spent all of the capacity that we had and left us with zero flexibility. And I think that for couples, it's important for us to remember that flexibility in our finances is one of the ways to de-stress our finances with our partner. Is if you got to figure out how to build that flexibility in. And sadly, sometimes that means giving up something that you have, taking a step back and saying, okay, maybe we used to be able to afford this, but maybe we can't afford it anymore. So we're going to give this up, and being able to have that conversation with your partner of saying, okay, how do we build back in some flexibility? Hopefully, raises will be coming in the future, but how do we build that flexibility in the here and now and not have to wait until a raise or a bonus?
Okay, I'll cancel that wine club membership.
I told you to several months ago. No, I'm just kidding.
I mean, I think you're absolutely right. And flexibility can look different ways depending on your skills and your life situation and your circumstances. For some people, they've got a basement that they could rent out, but they prefer not to. Well, that creates like automatic flexibility. But a lot of people don't have that kind of situation. So how do you build in your flexibility? For you and your significant other, like, do you work at salary jobs, and are they companies that seem secure? Do you have any health issues, especially chronic things, right? Like, building in that flexibility, it starts with building that solid base of that emergency rainy day kind of fund. And there's the conventional wisdoms out there, and people will tell you, oh, this many months or this much amount. And I mean, it's not that it's like awful advice. And if you just took like a random finance person's advice and they said, like, have 6 months of money for an emergency fund, this is totally fine. But you can also de-stress it by looking at your particular situation. If one or both of you is an entrepreneur, or your income is heavily based on commission, that can nudge you towards having a little bit more of a safety net,
Mm-hmm.
right? Whereas if you're both salaried, or that can nudge you towards, you can take a few more chances, right? Especially if maybe you feel like your company's stable and your job is secure. Like I said, health issues. If you feel like there's something that could flare up and cost a lot of money, then maybe you want to have a bit more saved up, right? If you're fortunate to be in really good health, obviously you never know what the future holds, but okay, right? It's kind of like the getting the high deductible health plan, that like the premiums are low each month, but if you have a health thing, you're going to need to pay a lot. You kind of make some of those decisions for yourself. Would you rather have to put more money down right now, or and have a lower risk if something goes wrong or whatever? And so, you kind of balance these things out. Uh, but at the end of the day, if you're able to set aside enough money to handle some swings and even a couple of months of unemployment or decreased income, it just makes such a huge difference,
Yeah.
and I can analyze the heck out of all the different reasons to think about doing this much or that much in the emergency fund, but setting that up there, usually it's going to make a big difference for both partners, but there's often one where it's going to, like, they're going to sleep better at night, literally. And that's worth a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. So give us the dessert. So I follow the advice. Me and my partner follow the advice. We're implementing everything. What is some of the positive results that you've seen from your clients who have had these conversations, who figured out these plans?
Well, you said more sex, better sex, right? So that's, I mean, that works.
How do you top that, right?
uh, the there's the financial and there's the human side of it, is sometimes how I'll split it to kind of think of it. They're very much overlapped, but in terms of, like, for explaining it, it's like paying down debt, of course. Clients who had what they needed to have an emergency fund, but the money, some here, some over there. I don't know what I'm going to do with that bonus, whatever, right? And then they can actually see it and understand what it means, right? Those are huge de-stressors. I have one of my favorites is a client who they were helping their kid who was in college. And they basically, it was like, okay, you can just use this credit card for these types of things. And they were pretty nervous to talk to their kid again. But once they were doing this work and communicating about their own finances and looking at their own finances, they realized, you know what, we got to have a conversation with our daughter, clarify and talk to her about, scaling back a little bit and having more expectations. And they went and talked to their daughter, and she goes, I'm so glad you guys came to talk to me about this, because she was about to graduate college. She's like, I'm getting a job. I'm getting into the real world. I got to figure out how to handle some of this stuff. Right. So I'm so grateful that you're actually helping me, right, by doing this. So that's awesome, because sometimes it has effects on other family members. But the best is just the improvement in the intimacy for the couple, the emotional intimacy, and the, like, it can both create more intimacy because you are working on something together and you're getting to know each other better, and you can share when you get nervous or scared or frustrated or resentful, and that can really build the connection. But it also can remove some of the obstacles that cover up the, like, intimacy and connection that's already there. And that's what you were saying, like, David, about, like, de-stressing it, right? Like, if we can decrease the stress, and I never say, like, no stress, no anxiety. That's unrealistic. But
Yeah, that is
I say,
unrealistic.
yeah, I say, but what if we could 20, 30, 40, 50, 60% less, right? Anxiety coming into the conversation. Or maybe you think about it 12 times a day instead of 34, right? Like, what might come of those other 22 thoughts, right? Like
Right.
wonderful things. And I mean, I have dramatic stories, the clients who come to me and they're on the verge of divorce, and I never forget the one. It was actually my very first client ever, and they said, we're best friends again, right? Like by working through this and getting on the same page with their finances. So it can make a huge impact. But it's the day to day, there's enough things going on in the broader world and in your immediate world that can add a lot of stress to your life. If I can help people mitigate one of those, and money is an important one, then that's huge. I mean, it just makes such a big difference. And, people, they're just like lighter, like emotionally lighter. You can sometimes see when they turn that corner and they get it, that like, oh, right, you're not actually just being a jerk, and I'm not either. And let's just do our best together. Like it's different. The weight, they're just lighter and freer, right? And that's a gift, and so that's something that I strive to share with as many people as I can.
So there's the takeaway, folks. Working on your spreadsheets together will make it more fun when you're under the sheets together.
Oh, yeah.
Look at that. There's a tagline for us.
Uh-huh.
So Adam, this has been a superb conversation. Where can our listeners connect with you? Where are you online? How can they find more of Adam Cole?
For sure. Thank you guys so much for having me. And couplesfinancialcoach.com is my website. And I just released my first book, which I'm super excited about, called Financial Intimacy for Couples. And it's really meant to be an A to Z. It's like self-help blended with workbook kind of thing. And
Nice.
if you go through that, you're going to go from wherever you are to having a plan and being able to communicate about money in a healthy way. So you can find that if you go to couplesfinancialcoach.com/book. You can see the link. You search Financial Intimacy for Couples on Amazon. Social media, I'm usually at Couples Financial Coach is the handle. So that's what to remember, Couples Financial Coach. And, feel free to shoot me an email. It's adam@couplesfinancialcoach.com. And
I'm noticing a pattern here.
Yeah, exactly.
yeah, I think so too. It sounds no, so
Somebody's
that's
branded.
basically thank you. I'll take that as a compliment from folks who are as well branded as you two are. Yeah, that's it. I mean, I always encourage people to reach out. Happy to share any resources or thoughts on questions for anyone who feels like they would benefit from individualized, personalized support. I offer free consultations, and you can find out about all of that on my website. And let me know. Let's work towards financial intimacy, financial harmony.
Awesome. Thank you so much for coming on the show. We appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Capital One Auto Navigator does more than just auto financing. We're here to help you find a car you love, too. Shop millions of cars from thousands of dealers nationwide. Research your favorite makes and models. Explore dealers near you and more. All on Auto Navigator.
Thank you, Adam, for an informative and necessary interview for our community. Thank you, our listeners and viewers, for joining us for another episode. Get your Queer Money takeaways from this particular episode. Several of those ways to connect with Adam in this week's newsletter.
Then join us this Thursday as we dive deeper into fabulous retirement planning for gay people, and next Tuesday when we discuss a unique way to generate income through your retirement using retirement investments to purchase real estate. Have a great week, and until next time, stay fabulous.